Welcome. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. What if the person you thought was dead wasn't? What if everything you believed was a lie? When Margaret Carter buried her son, Captain Ethan Carter, she thought she had lost him forever. But when his loyal dog, Shadow, started acting strangely, it led to a chilling discovery: an empty coffin, a missing body, and a government conspiracy lurking in the shadows. As Detective Richard Grant begins to investigate, he uncovers a truth more dangerous than anyone expected. This is a story of betrayal, deception, and the relentless pursuit of justice, where a mother's love, a detective's instincts, and a soldier's courage collide in a fight for survival. Stay with me, because this is not just a mystery, this is a battle for the truth. The morning sun rose slowly over Brooklyn Heights, New York City, casting a golden glow over the quiet, historic neighborhood. The air was crisp, and the distant hum of the city's awakening filled the streets. But amid the usual calm of the morning, an unsettling sound shattered the peace: a desperate, relentless barking. It came from the front yard of Margaret Carter's home. The dog, a large German shepherd named Shadow, stood near the porch, barking furiously, its body tense, its eyes filled with something more than just distress. It was as if he was trying to tell the world that something was terribly wrong. Inside the house, Margaret Carter, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled into a loose bun, sat on the couch, hands trembling around a cup of tea. Her face bore the weight of grief that had settled into her bones since the day she was told her son, Captain Ethan Carter, had died in the line of duty. A knock at the door made her jolt. Standing outside was Linda Mitchell, the neighbor from across the street, a kind woman in her 50s. She had once been a nurse and had seen enough suffering in her lifetime to recognize the look on Margaret's face. "Margaret, I heard Shadow barking all morning. Is everything all right?" Before Margaret could answer, another voice interrupted. "I don't think it is." Detective Richard Grant, an old friend of Ethan Carter, had just arrived, a retired homicide detective. Grant still carried the sharp instincts that had made him one of the best in the force. His eyes followed Shadow, who was now clawing at the wooden floorboards near the center of the living room. Then, his gaze shifted to the coffin. It lay in the middle of the room, surrounded by flowers and framed pictures of Ethan Carter, a soldier, a hero. Margaret had refused a state burial, wanting to keep her son close, at least in death. But Shadow's behavior wasn't normal. The dog wasn't mourning, it was warning them. A chill ran down Grant's spine. Something wasn't right. "Margaret, I need to check something," Grant said, his voice measured. He knelt down and placed his hand on the polished wood of the coffin. Margaret's eyes widened with fear. "You think," she whispered. Grant nodded. "I need to open it." Silence filled the room. Then, Margaret gave the smallest nod. With careful hands, Grant unlatched the coffin's seal and slowly lifted the lid. The scent of fresh wood filled the air. But something was wrong. There was no body inside. Just an empty space. The room spun. Margaret Carter gasped, clutching her chest as Linda Mitchell rushed to support her. Shadow barked louder now, pacing, his tail stiff, his ears perked up in full alert. "Where's my son?" Margaret cried, her voice breaking. Grant stood frozen, staring at the empty coffin. In all his years of working homicide, he had seen gruesome crimes, unthinkable betrayals, but never had he seen anything like this. A stolen body, a cover-up, or worse, Ethan Carter was never dead to begin with. Before he could process his thoughts, Shadow suddenly turned, barking toward the window. A black van. It was speeding away, cutting through Fifth Avenue, merging into the busy morning traffic of New York City. "Damn it, they're getting away." Without hesitation, Grant sprinted out the door. He jumped into his old Toyota Camry, the engine roaring to life. As he peeled out onto the street, he reached for his phone and called in a favor to an old friend at the NYPD. "This is Richard Grant. I'm in pursuit of a black van, possibly involved in the disappearance of Captain Ethan Carter's body. I need backup." His heart pounded as he wove through traffic, pushing the Camry to its limits. The van ahead was driving recklessly, running red lights, dodging pedestrians. "They know we're onto them," Grant muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. They tore through Madison Avenue, dodging yellow cabs and early commuters. The van swerved sharply onto Lexington Avenue, heading toward the outskirts of Queens. Then, just as Grant gained on them, the van suddenly veered into a narrow alleyway, too tight for his car to follow. Damn it, he slammed the brakes, watching helplessly as the van disappeared into the labyrinth of backstreets. By the time Grant returned to Margaret Carter's house, the place was surrounded by unmarked police cars. Linda Mitchell was comforting Margaret, who sat in stunned silence, clutching a picture of Ethan. Grant walked inside and crouched beside Shadow, running his hand through the dog's fur. "You were trying to tell us, weren't you, buddy?" Shadow whined softly. As Grant stood up, his mind raced through possibilities. Why would someone steal Ethan Carter's body? Or was it possible that Ethan was still alive? Then, as if the universe had been listening, Shadow did something strange. He walked to Margaret Carter and sat down beside her, then lowered his head and nudged his collar with his paw. A silent message, a clue. Linda Mitchell leaned in and unfastened Shadow's collar. As she flipped it over, her fingers brushed against something sewn into the fabric. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and slightly crumpled. A note. Margaret's hands trembled as she opened it. The words inside were scrawled hastily, almost as if written in fear. "Danger. Don't trust anyone. The key is in the drawer. Find me in the basement." The room fell silent. Everyone exchanged looks, the realization sinking in. Ethan Carter had left this message. And if he had, then that meant only one thing. He was still alive. This concludes part 1 of the story. Let me know if you want any adjustments or if you'd like me to continue writing part 2. Smile. The discovery of the note had changed everything. For a week, Margaret Carter had mourned her son, believing him to be dead. Now, with shaking hands, she held the one thing that suggested otherwise. Ethan Carter was alive, somewhere. The weight of this realization hung heavy in the air of her Brooklyn Heights home. Detective Richard Grant and Linda Mitchell exchanged glances, both understanding the gravity of the situation. Someone had gone to great lengths to fake Ethan's death. To steal his body? No. To erase him entirely. And whoever they were still out there. "The key is in the drawer," Grant murmured, repeating the words from the note. He turned to Margaret. "Did Ethan keep a safe or a locked drawer in his room?" Still shaken, Margaret nodded. "His desk. He always kept it locked. I never had a reason to open it." The group moved upstairs to Ethan's old room. It was pristine, almost untouched, with framed photographs from his military service and commendations neatly placed on the walls. Grant wasted no time searching through the desk. The top drawers opened easily, but the bottom one was locked. He pulled the handle, testing its strength. "Shadow, come here, boy," he said, patting his knee. The German shepherd trotted forward, tail wagging, his head tilting as if waiting for instruction. Linda crouched next to him and retrieved the key they had found sewn into his collar. With a quick twist, Grant unlocked the drawer. Inside, there was a USB drive and a crumpled piece of paper. The paper contained a series of scribbled notes, barely legible. "They know. I don't have much time. I'm being followed. If you find this, do not trust the government. There's a leak. Shadow will lead you to me." Beneath it, coordinates were scrawled. "Coordinates? This looks like a location," Linda said, tracing the numbers with her finger. Grant's mind was already racing. He recognized the general format, military coordinates. Ethan had been in intelligence operations before his disappearance. "We need to check what's on that USB," Grant said. They hurried downstairs to Margaret's living room, where Grant pulled out his laptop, plugging in the USB drive. He clicked on the only file inside, a video. The screen flickered, and the recording began. A dimly lit room. Ethan Carter sat in front of the camera, his face covered in sweat, his eyes darting around as if he expected someone to burst in at any moment. "If you're watching this, then I failed. Or I'm dead. Or worse," Margaret Carter gasped, her fingers clutching the armrest of her chair. On the screen, Ethan continued, "I was assigned to investigate an underground arms deal linked to foreign agents. But what I found was worse. Someone high up, someone in our own government, is feeding classified intelligence to foreign operatives. The second I got too close, they turned on me." A sound in the background startled Ethan, and he looked away, listening. Then he turned back to the camera. "They will stage my death. They will erase me, but I am not dead. If you're watching this, I need you to follow the coordinates. And most importantly, do not trust anyone. Even the people who claim to be on your side." The screen went black. Silence filled the room. Grant exhaled sharply. "Jesus Christ. They tried to kill my son," Margaret whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "And they almost got away with it." Grant turned to Linda. "We need to find these coordinates. Now." Linda quickly input the numbers into her phone's GPS. Her eyes widened. "It's in Queens. An old industrial warehouse. Abandoned for years. That explains why they took off toward Queens when I chased them earlier," Grant said, standing up. At that moment, a knock at the door made them all freeze. Shadow growled low, his ears pressed back, muscles tense. "Stay behind me," Grant whispered to Margaret before approaching the door. Through the peephole, he saw a familiar face. General William Harris, the head of U.S. military intelligence. Opening the door just enough to see his face, Grant kept his expression neutral. "Detective Grant," Harris greeted him with a polite nod. "I was informed of some irregularities regarding Captain Carter's case. I assume you've discovered them as well." Grant narrowed his eyes. "And how would you know that?" Harris didn't blink. "Because we've been watching, and if you don't want to get yourself, or his family, killed, you need to step away from this." From behind Grant, Shadow let out a deep, guttural growl. "If you knew something was wrong, why didn't you intervene before?" Grant challenged. A tense pause. Then, Harris spoke, his voice quieter. "Because there's a mole inside our own ranks. I don't know who, but whoever it is, they have power. More power than me. If you go after this alone, you won't make it out alive." Grant clenched his jaw. "I don't care," he said. "I'm not leaving a soldier behind." A flicker of respect passed over Harris' face. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. As soon as he was gone, Grant shut the door and turned to the others. "That means we're running out of time. We leave now." By the time they reached the outskirts of Queens, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the abandoned industrial area. The warehouse loomed in front of them, gray, lifeless, and eerily silent. Shadow sniffed the air and let out a low whine. Something, or someone, was inside. Grant pulled his gun. "Stay close. And if anything happens, get the hell out." They moved through the broken entrance, stepping cautiously over shattered glass. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of oil. Then, movement. A faint noise, like chains shifting. Shadow bolted forward, barking furiously. And then they saw him. Tied to a chair in the center of the warehouse. Covered in bruises, his clothes torn and bloodied, was Ethan Carter. His eyes, swollen and weary, lifted toward them. A mix of relief and shock crossed his face. "Grant, Mom?" Before anyone could react, gunfire erupted. Shadow lunged toward a shadowy figure near the back. Knocking them off balance, Grant dived, shielding Margaret, as bullets ricocheted off the concrete walls. Two masked men rushed forward. But Grant fired first, taking one down. The second turned to flee. But Shadow tackled him, pinning him to the ground. Panting, Linda rushed to untie Ethan, her hands shaking. "We got you, Ethan. You're safe now." But even as they freed him, Ethan shook his head, urgency in his voice. "No, you don't understand. They're not done yet." And from outside, the sound of approaching vehicles filled the air. More were coming. The fight wasn't over. The rumble of approaching vehicles sent a wave of tension through the air. Ethan Carter, barely able to stand, clung to Detective Richard Grant for support. His face was bruised, his wrists raw from the ropes that had bound him. But his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, were still filled with determination. "They're coming, and they won't leave witnesses," he rasped. Outside, the screech of tires echoed through the Queens Industrial District, followed by the unmistakable clatter of boots hitting pavement. Grant turned to Linda Mitchell and Margaret Carter. "We need to move, now." But there was no time. A voice boomed from outside. "We know you're in there. Carter, surrender now, and maybe we'll let your mother live." Margaret Carter let out a sharp breath, fear flashing across her face. Shadow, ever the protector, let out a deep growl, stepping in front of her. Grant clenched his jaw. "That's not a negotiation. That's a death sentence." Ethan lifted his chin. "They want the USB. The one you found in my desk." "Too bad. They're not getting it," Grant said. The windows shattered as a hail of bullets tore through the warehouse. Grant grabbed Margaret, pulling her behind an overturned crate. Linda ducked low, dragging Ethan with her. Shadow barked wildly, his instincts razor-sharp as he paced, ready to attack. The gunfire stopped for a brief moment. Then, another voice called out. A voice that made Ethan Carter's blood run cold. "Ethan, it's over. Give us the drive, and you can walk away. You don't want your mother to get hurt." It was Agent Daniel Brooks. "The traitor. That son of a bitch," Grant muttered. "He was my superior officer." Ethan whispered, realization dawning. "He's the mole. He's been selling intelligence to China." Margaret clutched her son's arm. "And he tried to kill you?" Ethan nodded grimly. Grant peeked through a hole in the wall. Brooks stood with at least 6 armed men, all wearing tactical gear. The odds weren't in their favor. Then, something caught Grant's eye. Across the lot, a familiar figure was approaching, a man in a long coat. Walking with slow, deliberate steps. General William Harris. "Oh, now you show up," Grant muttered. Harris raised a hand, and the soldiers with Brooks hesitated. The general's deep voice cut through the night. "Brooks, stand down. This is over." But Brooks only laughed. "You're a fool, Harris. The government won't save you. We have people everywhere. You think I'm the only one?" He turned back to the warehouse. "Last chance. Carter, give me the drive, or I put a bullet in your mother's head." Ethan Carter inhaled sharply. His mind raced. Then, Shadow barked once, loud and clear. It was a signal. Ethan turned to Grant. "We fight." The next few moments happened in a blur. Grant moved first, taking aim and firing through the shattered window. His bullet hit one of Brooks's men square in the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. Ethan, despite his injuries, grabbed a discarded pistol and fired toward the others. Shadow lunged, knocking a soldier down, his teeth sinking into the man's arm. Gunfire exploded in the warehouse, echoing through the steel beams. Linda Mitchell dragged Margaret to cover, shielding her as bullets ricocheted off the walls. Outside, Harris barked an order. From the shadows, a squad of military intelligence operatives emerged, men loyal to the general. Ready for a fight, the gunfight turned into chaos. Brooks, realizing the tide was turning, began to retreat, but Ethan Carter saw him, and he wasn't about to let him escape. With a surge of adrenaline, Ethan pushed forward, dodging bullets, his breath coming in sharp gasps. Brooks turned, spotting him. For a moment, their eyes locked. Then, Brooks raised his gun. Ethan Carter didn't hesitate. He fired first. The bullet struck Brooks in the chest, sending him stumbling backward. He gasped, blood spilling from his lips as he fell to his knees. The man who had betrayed his country. The man who had betrayed him. He choked out a few last words. You think this ends with me?" Then, he collapsed, and he was gone. The gunfire slowed. One by one, Brooks's remaining men either fell or surrendered. Shadow, still standing guard, let out a low, victorious growl. Ethan Carter exhaled heavily. His hands trembled as he lowered his gun. It was over. By the time the dust settled, the police had arrived, cordoning off the area. The bodies were taken away, and the scene was processed. But the real war had only just begun. General William Harris walked over to Ethan Carter, his face unreadable. "You did good, son, but this is far from over." Ethan nodded. "I know, but at least we stopped the leak." Harris exhaled. "For now, but we'll be watching, and you'll need to disappear for a while." It was true. Ethan Carter couldn't just go back to his old life. Not yet, but at least he was alive. At least he had a chance. Margaret Carter stepped forward, her hands cupping her son's face. "I thought I lost you, Ethan," she whispered, tears falling freely. He pulled her into an embrace. "I'm here, Mom. I'm not going anywhere." Shadow nudged Ethan's leg, tail wagging. He let out a short, satisfied bark. "Yeah, buddy, I owe you one." Ethan chuckled, scratching behind the dog's ears. The world moved on, but for Ethan Carter, life had changed forever. For a few weeks, he stayed hidden in Aspen, Colorado, where General Harris had arranged a safe house for him. The government needed time to clean up the mess left behind by Brooks and his network of traitors. But eventually, it was safe to return. One quiet morning, back in Brooklyn Heights, Margaret Carter stood on her porch, looking out at the sunrise. And then she heard it, footsteps. She turned, and there he was, Ethan Carter, alive and well. "Mom, I'm home." Tears welled in her eyes as she pulled him into an embrace. Behind him, Grant, Linda, and Shadow stood smiling. It had been a long road. A road filled with deception, betrayal, and danger. But justice had been served. And in the end, the Carter family was whole again. This story teaches us a powerful lesson about truth, justice, and resilience. Captain Ethan Carter was betrayed by those he trusted, but he never stopped fighting for what was right. Detective Richard Grant followed his instincts, refusing to accept what seemed like the truth. And Margaret Carter, a mother who had lost everything, never gave up hope, proving that love and determination can defy even the darkest conspiracies. The story reminds us that corruption can exist in places we least expect. And sometimes, those in power will do anything to silence the truth. But justice only prevails when people are brave enough to question, investigate, and fight back. It also highlights the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Shadow, the loyal dog, was the first to sense the danger and ultimately played a key role in uncovering the truth. Sometimes, the ones who seem powerless can make the biggest difference. In the end, the lesson is clear. Never stop searching for the truth. Never be afraid to stand up for justice. And never underestimate the power of hope, loyalty, and determination. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful and emotional stories. Your support means everything. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you want more stories like this. And remember, sometimes, the truth is hidden in the most unexpected places. See you in the next story.